Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello and welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth with, yes, your intrepid host, Peter Robbins. You are listening or watching on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. If you subscribe to KGRA Digital Broadcasting, you will be able to access not just my show and all past ones, but thousands, literally, of fine programming on UFOs and the paranormal going back quite some years. Many of them hosted by esteemed colleagues and folks who have gone on to great fame and acknowledgement in their given fields. If you use my name, Peter, when you subscribe, you'll receive a 30% discount. You can watch past shows, or listen, to past shows on KGRA, as well as on Spreaker.com. No monologue tonight. We're going to get right into it. And I'm delighted to have this guest. He is a good and true friend, a colleague who I have tremendous respect for. Also, somebody that lives fairly close by me. So we have an opportunity to get together over the years more than I do with other colleagues. And as a broadcaster, he is host of an extraordinary program, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Seriah Azkath has been studying the unknown for more than 30 years and is currently at work on 2 books. The first, an autobiography, the other, a book about new ways of looking at the various phenomena he's been so involved in chronicling all these years. Seriah's studies have spanned the world of the unexplained, UFOs, and lost civilizations, having been a strong focus of his throughout. And perhaps not surprisingly, Seriah has also had a lifetime of strange experiences himself. He's been a broadcaster for more than 25 years, hosting the show that I've been a guest on, which is Where Did the Road Go? With a question mark. One of my favorite titles of all time of any broadcast ever. And a music show, metal-based, called Last Exit for the Lost. His website is wheredidtheroadgo.com. And Seriah Azkath, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hey, Peter. It's an interesting change of pace.
It is. This is truly a change of seating and roles. It has always been you on the other side of the microphone interviewing me, and now I get to make up for it. Seriah, to start with, you, how can I say it? For me, you're emblematic of a lot of people around the country who are deeply and seriously involved in paranormal studies, UFO studies, who do their homework, who read the books, who make contact with the personalities, but are not world famous. You have had so many distinguished and up and coming and unique guests on your show over the years that I, as a listener, have listened to. And you live your life in several worlds. One is the study of UFOs and the paranormal. Also, it was some years after we met that I realized, like me, you're not just a reader, but you are a man creating a library, and a remarkable library it is. So we also share that great love of books and archival aspects. But let me begin at the beginning by asking you, where were you born?
I was born on Long Island,
Where?
Sayville.
Not that far from where I came of age in Rockville Center in Nassau
Yeah.
County. And siblings?
I have a brother.
Okay. And did either of your parents do anything professionally that might have awakened your interest in the paranormal?
No, not at all. They totally encouraged it, but they had no interest in it themselves.
Okay. Um, for me, um, before we get into sort of the meat and potatoes of tonight's discussion, I have this curiosity that really is one of the things that got me into broadcasting about how people became the individuals that they ultimately became.
Hmm.
So, when you were young, when you were in elementary school, um, at the point where you transitioned from, Dick and Jane kind of books to being able to read an adult book, a real book, what were the first kinds of books that you were interested in?
I have no idea. I don't remember much of my youth. The experiences that ended up with me getting my name seems to have Swiss cheese my early memories.
That was the next question because we never discussed this. I do know that at a certain point, as you've told me, your name, Seriah Azkath, came to you in a dream. Is that
No,
correct?
no, the second part, yes, Azkath. The first part was literally spoken into my head while I was sitting in someone's car.
Ah,
And I knew it was supposed to be my name, and I said, "I'm not using that name." And slowly I started using the name, and it started having effects on things around me.
and your second name?
Azkath, I dreamed it numerous times,
Okay.
and at some point realized that's supposed to be the second part. It's not so much first and last name as much as they're like, mirror opposites to one another. So it
Well,
kind of evokes balance, you know?
it does. And for me, well, not only a unique sounding name, but it has an air of being an ancient sounding name as well.
It didn't exist when it was spoken into my head, not in modern times. I found maybe one person in, like, the Caribbean or something that had the name in the '80s, and that was it, and that's through thorough internet searching. There are some biblical references of people with the name Seriah, and they're very obscure biblical references.
Did you, because this is interesting, at a certain point, you simply told the people closest to you, your family and your friends, that you would prefer being called this name rather than the name that your parents gave you.
Yeah, I started using it as, for people I was writing because I did a lot of tape trading and stuff, and I talked about the experience to them, and I said, "I'm just gonna start using this." And so when I started doing a zine, I did a music zine for a long time, I just used that as, like, my pen name. So when I transferred over to radio, I just kept using it, and, so basically, the people who knew me beforehand still use my legal name, and the people who have known me since, I generally introduce myself as Seriah.
Um, in the same spirit as the previous question about books, um, did you begin watching movies at home on TV or in the theater? If you in the theater, did you go on your own or with friends or with your parents? Films have such an impact on our lives, and I'm curious as how that part of your life began.
Well, I can definitely say Star Wars was one of my favorite movies, as was the Indiana Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones movies, and,
Yeah,
it's funny 'cause I feel Valet there because Valet, wanted to search for UFOs and wanted to be an astronomer, and that was the same way my brain worked, like, I wanted to be an astronomer to look for UFOs, and then my parents explained to me that's not what astronomers do, and I was like, "Oh." And then I was like, "Well, I wanna be an archaeologist like Indiana Jones to discover lost civilizations," and again, they were like, That's not what they do." So, yeah,
it's
I liked, Godzilla movies, monster movies, horror movies, sci-fi movies, and I still do for the most part. I mean,
yeah,
sci-fi's pretty much my favorite genre.
yeah. But Indiana Jones is in a class by himself, and
Yeah.
he is our favorite archaeologist, even if that's not primarily what archaeologists do.
Right. Even if
They
he's not
can.
actually an archaeologist.
Who cares? It's the movies, and it's
Exactly.
Steven Spielberg. Um, did you become interested in the non-standard, the obscure, the ancient, the ancient mysteries, the paranormal, UFOs, intellectually or because of an experience or experiences?
And as far as I know, it was intellectually. I just liked mysteries. I remember I think it was my 7th grade history teacher. I asked him once why we don't talk about, whether the aliens built the pyramids or not, or what happened to, what happened to Atlantis, for example. Why isn't this part of what they teach in history? And he actually very honestly said, because we can't prove it yet. He's like, that
Interesting.
shouldn't
Wow.
discourage you for looking for this stuff. He's like, but it won't be taught in history classes till we can prove that it was history.
Good for him for being respectful to a student's question rather than, please give me
Yeah,
a break, kid.
exactly. Exactly.
Did that interest set you off to educate yourself on this subject through reading or through
Most,
documentaries or films or speaking to people? How
mo-
did you begin to build the database that, is you?
Mostly it was reading. Um, I had other friends who were interested in this stuff, lend me books and things like that, or I'd go to the library and get books. It was pretty intermittent. Like I'd go through bits where I read a lot about this stuff, and then I'd go back to fiction, and then I'd read. But it also seemed like it was hard to find really good stuff when I was a kid. I had the Mysteries of the Unexplained books and things like that from whatever company was it, Reader Digest. I don't remember, Time Life Books, maybe it was Time Life
Yes,
Books, I
both
think.
of them did series.
And so I had that type of stuff, and it wasn't till I think I read Intruders and Communion and
boy.
Mentions that I
Yeah.
started more aggressively following it, because now I was seeing some new ideas, and it made it a lot more interesting than just the same stuff I'd been hearing about over and over for years.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember when Dimensions came out. I think it was around the same time as uh, Communion and
It was,
Intruders, which
yeah.
both were published in 1987. So at that point, did the thrust of your interest really focus in more on UFOs?
Yeah.
Uh, okay. And by this time, had you had any paranormal experiences of your own or any UFO sightings or experiences?
No, my first UFO sighting wasn't until 2001, but I had, what I later learned, I didn't know at the time, was what's called a morbid Kundalini awakening. And that happened when when I was a young teenager, like 12, 13, something like that. And it started off with random pains along my spine, which I later realized were chakra points, even though I didn't believe in chakras at that point. Um, Hallucinations, both audio and visual, and a bunch of just other weird stuff that's really hard to categorize. And as it progressed, I started affecting electronics and just had a lot of very odd experiences that totally fold into that Kundalini experience, but I had no paradigm to put it in. There's nothing in the West that really talks about that or gives it any validation. So I just thought I was crazy for a long time, until my parents took me to enough therapists that I realized I wasn't crazy,
Uh,
but no one could tell me what was happening. And it was by chance. I think I ordered something out of Fate magazine, like a new free newsletter type of thing, and in that was a review of a new Kundalini book coming out. It was Llewellyn New Times, I think is what it was. And they were talking about this new Kundalini book, and I'm looking through the symptoms going, I have all of these, but this one. What is this? And so I went to the library and checked out every book on Kundalini they had, which was like 3,
wow.
and started reading. And John White's book, which was a compilation book, I think did me the most value, because it had people from all spectrums writing different, each paragraph was from a different perspective. So some
Mm.
people practicing Kundalini yoga, and then some people who were experiencing what I did, even in the East, where they had a paradigm for it, and having the same type of problems. So
Seriah, do you think, and I don't know if there's a hard way to answer this question, um, but you certainly had an opportunity to observe and absorb that people who choose a more mystical path and follow Kundalini, follow the teachings of Hinduism or Buddhism or whatever non Western modality, that they are more open to what we would categorize as paranormal, unexplained, or UFO experiences than somebody who is a pragmatist, sees the world in scientific terms, but still has an appreciation for and an openness to this world of other experiences.
I think anyone who's practicing things like meditation is probably more open to this stuff just by default. But I think if you get too pragmatic, you start finding ways to dismiss the weirdness.
Mm.
And I've kind of fallen to that category. I've had things happen where I'm like, no, I'm sure that wasn't anything. And then something will follow it. And I'll be like, okay, all right. Maybe it's something. But I always tend to even doubt my own experiences. And that's experiences I've had with other people too, where I always have that element of doubt with them, where I'm like, okay, we both saw that,
Yeah.
but could it have been something normal? Are we misinterpreting that? Because our senses are so hard. I mean, we're not seeing what's out there. We're seeing our brain's interpretation of what's out there and what the brain thinks is important.
Bravo. Well said.
So a lot of this stuff may go right past people because their brain just doesn't think it's important or doesn't have a face to put on it. One of my theories about people having really weird monster sightings and things like that is they are encountering something that their brain has no idea what to do with. And it just goes, I don't know, monster. And they see a monster and now they're freaked out and take off. And no one again ever sees that particular monster because their brain just needed to put a face on it because they were encountering something novel. And their mind had no idea how to deal with that.
You're touching on something here that I've given a lot of thought to as well. One thing that comes home to one who studies the UFO abduction phenomena to a serious degree and familiarizes oneself with the most credible accounts, spends time with some of these individuals who have had these experiences or maintain that they've had these experiences, is how they deal with those moments of confrontation. And although I'm hardly a mystic in my thinking, I am as sure as I can be that one of the aspects of these other intelligences, specifically the ones involved in abduction, is that no question they can cloud our minds. They can create what we call, as you know, a screen memory. They can put forward an image, perhaps with the understanding that because we can't deal with what's actually going on or what we're actually seeing, that they have the ability to soften it, reprogram it, so to say. That said, I've always felt that even if that was not the case, somebody like me who is very familiar with these scenarios, with descriptions of beings, with descriptions of contact events, who has not had anything in that realm, of a life-changing nature confront me. If tonight after the show I have dinner, work on some emails, make a call, watch a movie, whatever, and go to bed, and I wake up in the middle of the night with a glow coming from under the door and little figures standing around the bed and this feeling of not being able to move and perhaps starting to rise off the bed, I don't care how much my intellectual experiences have prepared me for this. I am pretty sure I would freak the blank out right then and there, and maybe not return to this field of study. The reason I bring it up is because I think one thing that people in the field of UFO studies don't necessarily credit, because it's not as sexy, it's not as exotic, and it doesn't quite fit into that matrix of thinking, that they are adjusting the channels, the vertical, the horizontal, and having a little fun with outer limits here. But that it's not out of the question in my mind that if somebody with a history of abduction or somebody new to the world of the paranormal looks and sees something that they cannot deal with, that they cannot accept, that makes them beyond uncomfortable, forget about the other intelligence's ability to cloud or affect our thinking. We will do it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
It happens all the time in more conventional shock and PTSD and uh, memory repression events. Sadly, more conventional, whether it's violence, sexual abuse, sudden death, whatever, and that we're just fine in terms of that mechanism when we need to use it. Um, can you share with us an event in your life that happened, somewhere at the point where you had this Kundalini experience? You may have had other experiences with friends or somebody that you happened to be with at the time, but that you had an experience, UFO or non-UFO paranormal related, that you still reflect back on, that you still wonder about, that you still feel defies everything that about how this could have happened, and yet you're as sure as you can be that it did happen, a memorable paranormal experience.
Probably one of the weirdest ones. Ironically, before I knew who he was, I submitted this to Jeff Ritzman's project that he was doing, collecting paranormal experiences and stuff. So I had taken a walk outside one night, and I've had this happen before, and John Keel's written about it too, where you get flashes of light, like someone's taking a picture of you with a flash bulb. And I have a big property. It's very dark out back. I like to go out back at night and look at the stars because there's a billion of them. There's almost no light pollution where I am. So I'll go out there. And so I keep getting these flashes, and the entire landscape is lighting up with these flashes. And they're kind of intermittent here and there. And in the field behind my house, there's no lights. There's nothing. Now there's a few because more people have built houses further down. But there's a long distance where it's a long field and it slowly curves upwards. There's never lights there, but there's a light in the field, and it's a very dim light. It doesn't seem to be shining as much as just glowing, and it's sitting in the field, and it's going on and off. And I'm out there kind of like looking at the stars, looking at the light, seeing this flashing and going like, okay, I feel totally normal. I don't, there's nothing going on mentally. I don't feel weird, or I don't feel any kind of Oz effect, but there's something going on here. And I start realizing the light's flicking on and off at about 7-second intervals, unless I watch it, in which case it finishes its on interval, goes off, and doesn't come back until I look away. So it's actually responding to me looking at it. And at the same time, I look up, and there's the moon. This was a night where there was a full moon, and these clouds are starting to come across.
Mm-hmm.
And as they go across the moon pops through the clouds and just starts vibrating. And I'm like, okay, that's an optical illusion. And I look away and I look up, moon looks normal. Then it starts popping through the clouds and shaking. And I'm going, okay, obviously the moon is not popping through the clouds, but I'm looking at this and it's as real as anything else I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And this went on for, for maybe an hour of this just repeating these occasional flashes. That light stayed in the field. Nothing else happened. And eventually I just went inside because like the clouds got so thick that the moon thing stopped happening. Everything seemed to calm down. The flashes went away, but the light was still in the field. Part of me wanted to walk into the field to the light, and part of me knew that was probably not a good idea, regardless of what the light is. But the light never moved, and all it did is faintly flash on, off. So it was on 7 seconds, off 7 seconds. But I could only watch from the corner of my eye. If I looked at it, like I said, it went off and stayed off until I looked away and then popped back on.
how long was this still going on when you left, so to say?
Yeah. Yeah, well, the light was still there. The flashes and the moon thing had stopped. I mean, my best guess that it was some kind of weird earth energy creating a ball of plasma in the field, and maybe affecting my senses enough to make me see the moon pop through the clouds.
That's about as conservative and grounded an interpretation as I can think of off the top of my mind. From there, you just go deeper into the world of theoretical thinking and educated guesses. But let's, like the Marfa Lights in Texas,
Right,
uh,
right.
the even if we don't understand it, that's the way it is sometimes. And the
Mhm.
fact that you have that phenomenon on your property, why am I not surprised? Um, at a certain point, I mean, in the era before podcasts, and you and I are still doing old fashioned radio shows. Um, Although, I guess by definition, once the show is completed, it's archived. And the archived recorded version, is that technically a podcast
Yeah,
or is a pod?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Because I mean, again, a podcast, as far as I understand, technically, it is not recorded for live listening or viewing. It's recorded and then blah blah. Anyway,
Yeah.
at a certain point, you started to listen to the radio. Um, were you listening to Coast, or what are the earliest shows that you were starting to listen to? Ardell, or where were you, connecting in the broadcast world with these subjects?
So I wasn't. I actually hated talk radio,
Interesting.
and I hated talk radio because of Rush Limbaugh. My dad listened to Limbaugh 24/7. Like, it was just always on, and he drove me nuts. And so I just had this distaste for talk radio.
Got it.
At some point, I discovered Graham Hancock, uh, through his Discovery Channel or History Channel special. There was like a 3-part special, I think, for the Underworld book.
Yeah.
And I was like, "What is this? Who is this guy?" And so I grabbed one of his books. I think I started with Heaven's Mirror, and it might have been in the days of MySpace. So I think I started following him on MySpace. And at some point, he's like, "Hey, I'm going to be on Coast to Coast tonight." And I was like, "Oh."
What's Coast to Coast?
Well, I knew what it was. I just didn't care normally, but I'm like, "Well, maybe I want to listen to this."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't really like talk radio, but maybe I'll tune in for a bit because I really want to hear Graham." And I ended up listening to the whole show. And I was like, "Wow, that was awesome." And then Graham put up a file with all the torrents of his appearances on Coast to Coast, going all the way back to Art Bell.
Wow.
And I went, "Well, I want that." And so I downloaded that, and I kind of savored listening to them, but didn't really think outside I like Graham on Coast to Coast.
Yeah.
And then at some point I started thinking, wait, are there other shows that he might be on? Are there other people doing these shows I might want to hear from? And the next thing you know, I'm a podcast junkie. And this is before podcasts were really big. I mean, there were only a small handful of really decent podcasts out there. So that's kind of how I got into podcasting, sort of reluctantly, I guess, in a way.
Well, you think of all of the possible individuals out there writing and working about mysteries in history, lost civilizations, the paranormal, UFOs. You certainly latched on to one of the great minds, God rest his good soul, and one of the finest writers on these mysteries that Graham was so well known for. How fortunate that was where the bar was set to start with for you.
Right. Yeah. And when I started Where'd the Road Go? I mean, my goal I had been listening to I'm not going to name the podcast, but it wasn't sometimes it was okay, sometimes it wasn't, but they had a lot of guests I liked. And they had Jesse Ventura on, and it was a horrible interview. And at some point, Jesse was saying something like, "Well, I think there should be a third or fourth party in the country." And the host says, "Oh, I think that idea scares me." And Jesse went, "Why does that scare you?" And they couldn't answer the question because they hadn't been listening to him in the first place.
Oh, gosh.
And I sat there going, "Why does this person get to interview Jesse Ventura and I don't?" And so when I started Where'd the Road Go, I said, I don't want to do anything sensational. I want to go deep into this stuff, but I don't want to take the sensationalist path.
So
And I
let's talk.
said,
Yeah,
and I,
let's talk about the show.
okay, well, my goal initially was I said, no one's going to care because I'm not doing the sensational stuff. But if I could get Graham Hancock, Andrew Collins, and Robert Schock, I'd be happy. Never had Graham on, at least not yet. I have talked to Graham, but just not on the show. I did say he would come on, but I haven't really followed that up yet. But I've had Robert Schock and Andrew Collins on numerous times. And from there, my focus kind of changed to like people you don't hear everywhere.
Yeah. The list of guests that you've had is phenomenal. And I know that there are some people in broadcasting who, some of them quite successful, who have on everybody who's anybody. But the sense that you get listening or watching is that they are not familiar with this individual's work or writing or research. And that's being very kind, that they have not read their books. Do you feel an obligation to educate yourself to the guest before you invite them on,
Oh
rather
yeah,
than tell me who
absolutely.
you are and what you do?
Yeah, I try to read everyone's books. There have been a few guests who asked to come on, like those, I can't remember his name, but he goes, "Oh yeah, I'd like to come on and talk about my book." And I'm like, "Cool, do you want to send me a copy?" He's like, "It's 800 pages. I could give you talking points, or I could send you the book." And I went, 800 pages. Why don't you just give me the talking points on this one? But normally, yeah, I will read the books, and you know, take notes the entire time I'm reading, so I know what I'm talking about when I talk to them. Occasionally, people have said, like, why haven't you had Anthony Peake on? Or is a good example. I get that one a lot, and it's because I've never read Anthony Peake's books. And I feel it's a disservice to have him on until I've read at least the latest book he's done.
Hmm.
I've heard him enough. I could probably have a great conversation with him, but I'd rather read the book first and then bring him on.
In this time that we're in, which is, I'm sure, going to be looked at in future history as a golden age of conspiratorial thinking and non-verified research and claims, sad to say, among other positive things that are happening. Have you had the experience of somebody contacting you and saying, I really want to be a guest on your show and this is why, or I really want you to have this person on your show and here's why, and you do a little bit of homework and you realize this person is possibly out of their mind or not telling their truth or delusional and I don't want to be a hard ass here, but I have to communicate to them or this intermediary individual that I'm really not interested in having them on as a guest? And how does one do that with a little bit of grace if possible?
Yeah. I mean, I don't deal with conspiracies generally. So that one's pretty easy. If someone comes to me with some crazy conspiracy, I could just be like, I don't do conspiracies. Sorry. There have been a few people who have contacted, not a ton, not as much as you would think. And again, I think because I don't do that sensationalistic stuff,
Yeah.
it doesn't appeal to the people who would normally, want to come on.
Yeah.
But I get them occasionally. I've had some pretty crazy books sent to me where I'm like, this is not based on any reality other than what this person thinks. And I just, I won't do it. It's not the path I want to take.
Yeah. When you started to broadcast, there must have come a point where you said, I'm now a broadcaster. I can at least ask somebody who is really famous and who I have a lot of admiration and respect for, but they probably don't do smaller shows like mine. But you know what? I'm going to contact them anyway. Can you give us an example of somebody like that who responded positively and went on to be a guest either once or in, more than once?
So I think the fact that I was on commercial FM radio made a difference.
Yeah.
My second guest was David Weatherly. Did not expect him to do it. And that immediately got a lot of attention and helped promote the show.
Yeah.
Because he was, very hot on the Black Eyed Kids thing at the time.
Yep.
And so, like, I put the shows on YouTube just as I just want them available so people can hear them. I'll put them everywhere I can. And I think overnight it had 3,000 views, which now doesn't seem like a lot. But then it was like, whoa, this is my second video,
Yeah.
Robert Schock, too. I mean, I didn't expect Robert to come on, and Robert was very, very kind and came on more than once with me. And so, yeah, a lot of the people I contacted right off the bat, I'm thinking these people aren't going to do it, and every one of them did it.
Robert Schoch is a great intellect, a great mind. And for some of my viewers and listeners, they may be completely unfamiliar with him. Can you give us a brief uh, um, picture of who this great scholar is?
Yeah, Robert is the guy he's a geologist, and John Anthony West had been looking at some old books on Egypt, and one of the old books talked about um, that the weathering on the Sphinx was made from wind or from rain
Right.
and not
Water
wind.
erosion. Yeah.
Yeah, and so John Anthony West, not being a geologist, kind of looked up the difference and went, "It does look like rain erosion, but I need a geologist to look at this." And most of the geologists he contacted said, "No, I'm not going to look at that." But Robert Schoch said, "Sure, I'll take a trip to Egypt and look at this." And I think initially he said he didn't think it was going to pan out to anything. But he got to the Sphinx and he took one look at it and went, "Oh, that's rain erosion. That's a lot of rain erosion." And he was very excited because he thought, well, I'm going to give these Egyptologists something new to look at because it means the Sphinx is way older than they think it is.
And weren't they delighted to hear from him about that?
Yeah, I believe what he said is some of them actually spit in his face.
Oh,
And he did a conference in Canada, and it was Egyptologists and geologists, and every single geologist in the room 100% agreed that that was rain erosion.
wow.
And every Egyptologist told him to go home.
How interesting.
Because
That-
I remember Graham quoting one Egyptologist saying, your facts disagree with our theories, so your facts have to be wrong.
Yeah. Well, there's one for the books. That is a golden quote. It reminds me of a quote attributed to Stalin. If I'm off, it's by a word or two. If theory and practice differ, so much for practice.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is a scary way to think, and which is the roots of fascism on a certain level. And at the same time, this is a kind of fascism. I like so many people who are not terribly knowledgeable on it, I've been fascinated by ancient Egypt since I was a kid, probably since seeing, Hollywood movies on it. And then what for me is the extraordinary art, all rooted in, well, most of it in the reality for the ancient Egyptians of an afterlife and all of the things manufactured for it. But here's a case where, again, these people as a group, they are in lockstep. And there is, essentially a holy of holies that it can only be this old. Part of it is the understandable ego of the Egyptian hierarchy of understanding of if it predates a certain point, then it's not Egyptian.
Yes.
And that is not okay with us. And if you want to keep coming here and exploring these locations and have the respect and goodwill of the Egyptian government and the Bureau of Antiquities, toe the line. So with Shockley and the geologists, and I love the numbers that come up here because they really throw the whole thing into a cocked hat. How old are we potentially talking about the Sphinx's body being?
I think the minimum would be about 5,000 BC. Robert has said 10,000. And the interesting thing is the Egyptologists at the time said, well, where are all the pottery shards? Where is the evidence that there was a sophisticated civilization 10,000 BC that could have built this? And just a short distance away, they found Göbekli Tepe, which is easily at least 10,000 BC.
That's right. That's right. This for me is a wonderfully exciting area of study. And although I'm best known for my work in UFO studies, this will be of major interest to me for my entire life. It's one of the reasons I'm really thankful that UFO research brought me to the United Kingdom so many times, gave me a chance to visit so many mysterious prehistoric areas or early historic areas.
Right. There was an interesting article recently Dr. Bem out of Cornell had done some experiments on psi, and he had shown that people who were given random images, he would put he would be doing checking their brain waves at the same time. And when people are shown images of sex or violence, their brain exhibits certain brain waves that are different from everything else. And so he put this on he did this whole study and found that people were reacting to the images before the computer at random had even selected the image,
Hmm.
which meant there was some level of precognition going on a very normal level.
Hmm.
And it got peer reviewed, it got replicated, and 100% scientifically proven that these people are having reactions in their brain before the computer even chooses the image. And there was an article recently from a scientist saying, well, because of this, maybe our idea of what constitutes proof is wrong. And we've been doing this wrong all the way because we know this guy can't be right.
Mm.
So now we got to maybe we should think about redoing the whole system of scientific research. And that's how against any idea of like anything paranormal the mainstream scientific community is. Like they're willing to literally junk their system because their system is proving something that they don't believe in.
Damn, I hate when that happens. In your sphere of interest, whether or not it is generated on your own or something that a guest on your show may have, brought to the fore, have you studied or had much interest in the phenomena, primarily within the United Kingdom, but picking up on the shores of mainland Europe, of ley lines?
Not a lot. Probably the closest I've had on the show talking a bunch about that was Walter. Last name is completely escaping me at the moment. Who talks about the telluric currents and stuff, which is similar to ley lines but different at the same time. What's his name? Walter Bosley. Walter Bosley.
Very good. Okay.
Sorry, Walter.
I ask because one of the most challenging aspects of life in ancient or pre-ancient times, suggesting a technology, a worldview, a sophistication, an ability to map, chart, observe in a way that we do not credit the ancients with, is these ley lines, which crisscross Great Britain, the United Kingdom, are defined in part by energy currents and meridians. Where there are intersections, there can be a well, an energy vortex, an area that is very special to the local people, where an ancient monument was built, and then with the advent of Christianity, it was destroyed, but the church went right on the same spot. But in some cases, these lines run right up to the English Channel and then pick up in Karnak or in France like a gun sight and continue right on toward Germany, which for me suggests that somebody had an overview. And I don't mean that allegorically, which is mind-blowing, because once again, this is back to, Eric von Däniken land and ancient astronauts, or how could this have been observed or calculated so accurately, short of running, a piece of rope, on a boat across the English Channel, keeping it straight, keeping it on, that's just silly. I was just curious if your work, research, or interest had come into that area.
Well, for things like that, England at one point was connected to the rest of Europe, if I'm not mistaken. So running a ley line, if this stuff could be going back 20,000 years. It's not necessarily in our recent history, and it's just been carried down. You have the maps that Charles Hapgood put out there, the maps of the ancient sea kings.
Yes.
and those have Antarctica accurately depicted with no ice.
That's right.
And the last time Antarctica, at least lesser Antarctica, the last time it didn't have ice was during the last ice age,
Yeah.
which means that there were people, at least on ships, if nothing else,
Yeah.
mapping the contour of Antarctica ice free. And that's way more credit. And again, when you start looking at things like Göbekli Tepe, clearly that was not built by primitive people who were just, hunters.
No.
That was built by a sophisticated society with a culture.
Yeah.
And even if it was a meeting place of different cultures, that's something that wouldn't have been easy to build. And they kept building it and burying it and building it anew as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You have the temple in Gadong Padang, I think it's Gadong Padang, down in Southeast Asia, which might be 30,000 years old.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this stuff just keeps getting older and older, and I see no reason to assume that we have not evolved possibly past where we are now and then fallen due to catastrophe and things like that and had to rebuild. You see the same thing with the constellations, the star myths, all that stuff, how it goes out across the world, cross cultures. It's just there. It's the same symbology. I mean, it changes over time, but the core is still the same, which suggests it had a common root.
Very much so. And you've reminded me of how I reacted when I first had an opportunity to study the Piri-Reis map and the other related maps that should not have existed. We've all seen depictions, some of them wonderfully hopeless, of North America, as put forward by an Italian cartographer in 1570 or something. That's Florida, okay, but gee, it's the size of, et cetera. But these maps, once you've established beyond any reasonable doubt that there's no fraud involved, that the chain of evidence, so to say, historically is intact, that was mind-blowing for me. And I mean that in the most joyous kind of way, because like studying the work of Charles Fort and seeing so many places where science was wrong, to put it mildly, or where an artifact, again, fully established, fully vetted, not faked in any way, exists in a situation or location where it simply couldn't be, based on what we accept, what we feel, what we're comfortable about, the delineations of time and history. Same thing in terms of Lemura, Mu, Atlantis, which for me, I started to study in my 20s out of abject curiosity, and part of it to prove them wrong, because I'm a pragmatist, and the world has a logic to it, and this makes me uncomfortable. And then realizing the history of this planet is defined based on, the artifacts that we can find, and that there are cataclysms, natural and possibly not natural, that could have happened 30, 40, 80, 180, half a million years ago, that would have vaporized pretty much every vestige of human accomplishment. And so the realm of myth, legend, historical rumor begins to insinuate itself. And, we do our best to sort it out or reject it, or to always be open to it. And again, this Shockley's experience and the other geologists at the Egyptology conference in Canada is a perfect example of the thing hitting the wall. It can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. For me, that is the debunker's mantra. And there's no way. I mean, I've got a degree in Egyptology. Here's my PhD, and I studied with such and such, and I've been on digs, and don't tell me. I know, I'm an expert. Well, you're wrong. Sorry. Time to start again. There's a wonderful quote attributed to the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Max Planck. I think he received his Nobel in the 30s, which I absolutely love. Science progresses one funeral at a time.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately. There's also, things like Hamlet's Mill. That book shows how every culture, so many ancient cultures, have this idea of the precession of the equinox.
Uh,
And that's something you have to take a long time to observe because it's so subtle. But yet all these ancient cultures know about it and have included it in their myths, which suggests a fairly advanced scientific knowledge going way, way back into the dusts of history. There was I want to say it was a Discovery or History Channel show called Life After Humans or something like that.
yes.
And the interesting thing they found is that within 10,000 years, if all humans were wiped out today, 10,000 years from now, the only things that might be left would be the pyramids, ironically, and maybe the Hoover Dam. Everything else would be gone.
That was actually a brilliant series, and one that I have mixed feelings about.
Well, I didn't watch the series. I only watched the initial show, and that was their conclusion. And I thought, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so hard for us to find anything going back past a certain point, unless it was preserved just right.
Well, there's also, again, that affection for, that standing with, that desire to hold on to what's been passed down to you, that history begins at a certain point, so to say. Before that, it's prehistoric, and that there are certain givens that you don't screw around with. One is the age of the Sphinx, for example. Another might be the advent of the disappearance of the dinosaurs, for example. But that I think Atlantis is emblematic of it all. A civilization that developed, that thrived, that became technological, that developed forms of energy, possibly nuclear, that were advanced beyond anything we can possibly give them credit for, because it just can't be. That's too far away in the past for something like that to have happened, except that not only it may have self-destructed, or there may have been a total war that destroyed their presence, and that the vestiges passed down by survivors that at least survived to ancient Greece and that were discussed by Plato, or embodied in, Sumerian myth, or captured in a certain Tibetan story, that it's much easier to just put it off to folklore or to, magical thinking or something, as opposed to the vestiges of what is left of something very real.
Well, they also have denied so many things that have later been historically proven to exist. And the dating of Plato's Atlantis dates with the end of the last ice age. And part of the problem with that, I mean, Graham Hancock was at the lead of saying that this was a cataclysm. This was not something that happened over thousands of years where water levels slowly rise. This was massive, cataclysmic ice melt. And now you have scientists acknowledging that something happened that melted the glaciers very, very suddenly, and it needed something like a comet impact or something like that to do it. But they still won't kind of go that extra, yeah, okay, there was a cataclysm, because science doesn't like cataclysms. Everything should move slowly. So they're now slowly accepting the idea that maybe a comet created the Younger Dryas. And I think part of that comes down to we don't want to think that could happen again. We had what was it, the Kensington event, when we got hit with the solar flare at the end of the 1800s, and it burned out some of the wires that teletypes were using and stuff. If we got hit with that now, it would put us back to the Stone Age.
Can you imagine?
And it would take not a whole lot for the government to protect our wiring and all that stuff so that this wouldn't happen, but they're not going to do it because it's not an imminent threat. They don't believe, oh, that's not going to happen. We're not going to worry about it.
It's not a budgetary priority
Right.
either.
Exactly.
And
Even though it doesn't cost much, it's not in their, it's not something they need to do today because it's not happening right now.
but if there is a solar storm or some mega destructive hacking event, the world as we know it would be brought to a standstill. Can you imagine, even
Absolutely.
in just the world of banking? Say no more. Good luck. No ATMs are working.
No, no cars.
That's right. Utilities, everything coming to a standstill, and obviously chaos ensuing. We really are living on the edge, and this is as good a point as any for me to say we are coming into the end of the first hour of this episode of Meanwhile Here on Earth with my wonderful guest and good friend Seriah Azkath and myself, Peter Robbins. We'll see you on the hour. Don't go away.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
We are back on Meanwhile Here on Earth with my guest, Seriah Azkath. Seriah, like a lot of us, you have multiple interests in this world. It's not just caught up in the world of the arcane, the ancient, the mysterious, the paranormal. You like music. And
Yes.
I do too. I think most people can say the same. But you and I, in one area of our lives, are dedicated metalheads, and you do a show which deals with the wonderful world of popular music. And I just want to show people our logo here, the last exit for the lost, which is so wonderfully affectionate and warm and just fine for young children.
And that was actually done for me by Timothy Renner of Strange Familiars.
It's a great illustration. And while we're at it,
Yes, and that one was actually done by the late Jeff Ritzman.
it's great. And again, how I think the title of the show is genius. Where did it come from?
Okay, so I also very, very much a big professional wrestling fan. Not so much WWE, but some of the independent stuff. And there was a local company running some shows, and they would bring in some of the independent guys that I liked. And so I'd go to the shows and I'd interview some of the wrestlers. So at this particular show was in Watertown, and I actually got to interview Kevin Steen, who's now in the WWE as Kevin Owens, and that was one of my favorite interviews. And after the show, it was at this fair. The fair was completely closed by the time we left because we were doing all the interviews after the show. And we started driving. I've never actually, at that point, had never been into the actual city of Watertown. And as we come up to the stoplight, my friend, I guess it was my girlfriend at the time, said that she was hungry. And I was like, well, I don't know which way to go. We didn't have GPS or anything. It's like, I don't know which way to go, but it looks like there's lights ahead of us. And so we start driving, and she's in the back with her friend. My other friend is in the front seat with me. And we start driving down the road, and it comes over this little lip. And on the other side of the lip, the road apparently made a 90-degree turn into an industrial park. But in the dark, going over the lip, we didn't see the turn. So the next thing you know, we're on the grass. And I said, where'd the road go? And my friend looks down and goes, where did the road go? And they're in the back going, did you just say, where did the road go? And I hit the brakes right before the grass steeply went down to a building. And like, I stopped and went, okay, all right, let's try backing up because the road's gone. And looking at a map later, I was like, oh yeah. So we should have gone to the right, or the left, which is eventually what we, went back and did. But I was telling a friend of mine that story, and she was laughing, and she goes, that sounds like it should be the memoirs for the last exit for the lost. Where did the road go? And I went, I'm never going to do that, but that's actually a good name for my paranormal blog, which I had at the time. So I put it on the blog, and naturally, when I went to start the show, I was like, yeah, it's going to be called Where Did the Road Go? And I like the fact that on WVBR, where we air, it goes from Where Did the Road Go into the last exit for the lost.
Exactly. I know that from my experience of showing up for an interview, and before I leave, seeing a bunch of musicians in the next room getting ready to do their thing.
Right.
In the world of professional wrestling, have you ever had occasion to ask any of these individuals what they think about UFOs or the paranormal, if they've ever had any unusual experiences or sightings, or never the twain shall meet?
No, I never really brought it up with any of them.
How about in the world of popular music?
Only recently have I started doing that with bands, and I've had some independent bands who had that experience. I can't even remember the last one I talked to about it. And usually they're just small little experiences. The only band I think that went on in any at any length was One Eyed Doll. And Kimberly had all kinds of stories she wanted to tell me. And at one point they were going to come on and do like a full show, but we never got around to doing that. And she had some personal issues and kind of dropped off the face of the earth for a while. May still do it with them when they kind of emerge again. But the other one would have been a local band from Syracuse, a stoner rock band called Cactus Cathedral. Mm-hmm. They actually were listening to the station on the way in, heard Where Did the Road Go? And they were like, hey, I love this stuff, and I have all kinds of stories. So I had them come in and do an entire show one night. But in the past, I mean, the older interviews prior to doing Where Did the Road Go, I never really thought to ask. I was just focused on what I was talking to them about.
Yeah, I only ask in part because so many musicians that I've met over the years who have had careers that have taken them on the roads for extended periods of time, who are, to put it mildly, free thinkers, who read a lot, who are open-minded, first take these subjects quite seriously, and some of them have certainly had their share of paranormal experiences, UFO sightings, and the like.
Oh
Pretty
yeah.
much, the demographic of the rest of the world, but not surprisingly within the world of popular music as well.
Well, it's also that liminality that seems to open people up to it as well.
Yeah. In your experience, have you had what you would consider a profound, truly anomalous UFO sighting or event?
The biggest one, and I both thank and curse Mike Cleland on this one. So I was driving to the radio station one night, and I'm driving along Route 89, which is going south along Cayuga Lake, and suddenly I'm getting blinded from my left side. And I'm thinking it's a car. I mean, you know the area. I'm thinking it's a car coming up a driveway with its brights on,
Right.
and from the lake. And I'm like, man, that is bright. Turn your brights off. And it just didn't stop. And I'm like, why is this not stopping? Why haven't they turned or, angled away from my face? And finally I kind of squinted through it. And in the sky is this pile of lights. It was enormous. And it was taking up a good part of the sky that I could see. And I was like, okay, what's that? And I slowed down and pulled over to the side, and I just watched it. And if I remember right, it had like stable lights on like the top and bottom, but along the middle, it had lights moving around as if they were going around an object, and they were multicolored.
Yeah.
It made no sound. There was no weird feeling or anything like that. And it slowly just dropped down until it disappeared in front of the trees and stuff in the lake. So it was a distance away. It wasn't close and looking like it was far away because it went behind those trees way down there.
Yeah.
So the thing was enormous, but I never saw an actual object. That's one of the things I noted because I tried to process as much of it as I could. And what I was seeing was lights. And they were so bright that if there was an object there, I couldn't see it. So I can't say I saw anything but lights. It didn't make a sound. And like I said, I felt normal. There was no Oz effect, nothing weird feeling about it, and it just dropped down and disappeared. I assume into the lake, but I didn't see it actually enter the lake. And Mike Cleland, I had been working on my book of paranormal experiences, and I've taken notes since 1990. And there's a lot of stuff to go through, and I had been through most of it at that point, was slowly starting to put it together. And Mike Cleland said, "What was happening in your life at that point?" And I went, I don't know. So I went back and looked and realized that happened right at the end of probably the biggest change in my entire life. And I went, oh, well, that's interesting. And of course, talking more to Jeff Ritzman and such, his focus on how these things happen in liminal times of our lives, I was like, well, now I got to go through everything again because now I have different eyes to look at it. So I had to scrap everything and start all over. And I found, like, when my girlfriend moved in, I was taking something out to the barn, and I look up and I see these lights shoot across the sky, and they would go into almost what looked like when you're doing video editing, you get that circle wipe. It was a light that would just kind of come on, form into a circle, and the light would disappear into it, and then it would disappear. And then a light would appear like that, and a light would shoot out of it and then go through another circle wipe. And I stood there for a good minute or two going, is this my eyes playing tricks on me? Like, this is really blatant that I'm looking at. And again, it was literally the day she moved in that this happened. So again, liminal period. And I went, if anyone else was here, would they have seen that? Or was that just for me?
You mentioned that you started making notes ultimately for what is going to become this book project in 1990 or so. Does this superimpose itself on the time that I asked you about at the top of the show about childhood memories?
So I started taking notes in 1990. And the sort of Kundalini awakening experience that I didn't know what was happened in 1991. So the stuff up to the late 1990, I have decent memory of because I took a lot of notes. I was basically told by whatever, I don't know how to explain exactly what I deal with, but I'll know things sometimes, or things will literally show me things in dreams. And one of the things I knew very distinctly was that I needed to start recording stuff,
Mm,
but everything, not just the weird stuff,
mm,
everything. And
mhm.
if I had not recorded everything, I would not have known what was going on in my life around the weird stuff. So I thought,
Again,
now I'm thinking back going, no wonder they told me to write down everything.
because again, without that you're aware of some major trauma that might have caused you to forget or to block out a whole myriad of childhood memories, is there any way you can logically account in your mind for not remembering so much about your childhood?
No, other than whatever happened to me seemed to change my perspective on reality.
Hmm.
And I don't really know. I mean, I didn't have any trauma in my childhood. There was nothing majorly traumatic that ever happened. And I talked to my brother recently about this, and he's like, "Yeah, there was nothing really in our childhoods that were bad. My parents were decent parents. When I was a teenager, I butted heads with my parents a lot, but that's not totally uncommon with teenagers. So, I mean, there was no abuse or anything like that. Um, which is almost weird with the number of weird experiences I've had. You find most people
Yes.
have some level of trauma in their past,
Yes.
who have these experiences, and I just, I didn't really have any. I had a pretty good childhood.
Well, that's fascinating in itself. And who knows, maybe you will be able to reconnect with it at some point in some manner. And I should say, Mike Cleland, who you mentioned before, is a good friend of both of ours, a wonderful writer about the UFO reality, an abductee, an experiencer, um, who has written 3 wonderful books. Although Mike, being Mike, says that the last book wrote itself in that it was people's response to his first book.
Right.
And I met him when he first started to work with Bud Hopkins and was coming to visit New York. One of the things about Mike is, this dedicated researchers working with open, honest, courageous experiencers have produced so much hard information. I expect it's the same in unrelated fields, but I'm just familiar with this one. And it was Mike who presented a thread that once we started to look at it in the research community, in this case led by Bud Hopkins, we saw that his case was not only not unique, but that many, many, many people shared some of these same patterns. And it had to do with the appearance or references to or a connection with owls
Yeah.
for people who have had paranormal experiences, especially UFO abduction ones. Was that something you were aware of in your work or your life before you met Mike or read his work?
No, not really. Although I have a lot of owls on my property currently.
Perfect.
Apparently some rare ones, because we get bird watchers sitting on the road waiting for them.
Oh my. Wow. Well, your nature photographs sometimes are just breathtaking. How large is your property?
About 4 acres.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, the pictures are very evocative. Um, in your interviewing individuals for Where Did the Road Go? In the world of UFO studies, can you share with us any particularly memorable guests that you've had on who are authors or experiencers, and why those interviews were memorable for you?
Guests in general or just UFO-oriented ones?
Start with UFO-oriented ones, and then we'll branch out.
I mean, honestly, probably Jeff Ritzmann was the most interesting to me,
Hmm.
partially because I identified a lot with some of the stuff he was experiencing,
Yeah.
and I liked the different ways he looked at stuff. I mean, the first time I had him on, we talked for, oh god, 6.5 hours. We did 3 shows, and then when we thought we were done, we started talking about music, and he was also a metalhead. And that took another hour. And then I almost lost the file because the recorder I had apparently didn't like recording over 6 hours. So when I got done, it was like, oh, this file is corrupt and won't play. And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no. But it would play in the recorder, just not anywhere else. So I had to replay it when I went to sleep and just record it onto another program. But yeah, the diversity of his experiences, I mean, that's, to me, that's up there with the stuff Whitley's experienced.
Mm.
The diversity of it and the way he looked at it all fascinated me.
In the world of paranormal experiencers, researchers, investigators, authors, you have had so many guests on over the years. Let me ask you this for starters. Have you ever gotten an account, either from the experiencer themselves or the person who investigated it, who is now sharing it with you, that you, how can I say it, you understood was accurate, authentic, that it had happened, that there's no attempt to fabricate or to overtly, misrepresent it, but still it pushed you to the edge of your own ability to accept that such a thing could have happened?
I mean, there are the occasional stories like that. Absolutely. I couldn't name one off the top of my head, but my philosophy going into that type of stuff is that I would rather believe someone who is lying than not believe somebody who is telling the truth.
Hmm.
Because if they're lying, okay, whatever, they lied, great. But if someone's telling the truth and then you outwardly don't believe them, that's going to make them keep all that stuff inside that much more when they probably need someone to talk about with it.
Yeah.
So I will always err on the unless there is something really blatantly red flag, I will always err on the idea of I'm going to take them at face value. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened to them. And as we talked earlier, I'm very much interested in the way our consciousness processes these things.
I'm with you on that. And hearing you say it, I would have to say I tend to take the same view. For somebody to have the courage to come forward and share something that may draw ridicule or doubt about their veracity, etc. I just don't find that this area of study is filled with liars.
No.
I mean, God knows we have been misled. Certainly I have, in respects over the time that I've been involved in this field, but these are the exceptions to the rule. You also remind me, sometimes sharing an account is an act of good faith. I had something happen to me when I was young, well, at 24 years old, and having the most extraordinary year, essentially wandering around India and Nepal and Afghanistan for months on end, completely on my own, with no connection to anybody or anything other than keeping myself alive and well and being a good human sponge and soaking in the world around me. What I'm about to describe, I wouldn't even call it paranormal. It was a trick. It was some kind of trick, and yet I know that it happened. I know that there's no accounting for it, nothing logical in the world of what I understand that magicians live through, although that's partly my naivete. I'm not a magician. And it had to do with one afternoon, some months into roaming India, I wandered into a small village, the only non-village resident there, with some basic Hindi, found out where I could buy something to eat and get some water and, take care of some basic needs. And in what I'll call the village square, this was, small sandstone buildings. It was a very basic community. And from the past, some of these places haven't changed much. India has changed a great deal in the past half century, but there are parts of it tucked away, I imagine, that are still like I remember. And a man came into the square, and like everybody, very simply dressed in white cotton, and he started to talk, but in a big voice to attract a crowd. And I did not understand, but I knew something was going to happen. And the only thing he had with him was a small side bag and a very large coil of rope. And I mean the kind of rope you'd tie a ship up to a dock, really thick. And he's just going on and inviting people to sit down. As they do, I join them. And there are probably a couple of dozen of us at a certain point just sitting in a semicircle around him, watching him lay the coil of rope on the ground, then take one end, then very deliberately talking all the time, holding it and pulling it up like a foot. And what do you know? It's standing. And then like another foot. And each time he did it, of course, we're all more and more galvanized. What's going on? How is this possible? Is there some kind of wire in it? I should say here, we're in a completely open area. There's no foliage to speak of. There's nothing going on up there. And he keeps doing it until that rope had to be, and I don't want to exaggerate here, memory and time, have their effect on us, but I would say at least 15 feet in the air, maybe 20 feet in the air. And then at a certain point, he very, very gently and very tentatively begins to remove his hands and removes them and backs up like a foot or so. There's not a sound. We are all transfixed. Then he literally takes his hand and goes up to the rope and goes, ping, and it collapses. Well, Seriah, it was like a reflex. We all ran at it. And the fact that I'm not a local, it didn't matter. I'm as involved as anybody. And what we were all doing was grabbing a part of the rope and twisting it and there had to be something in it.
Yeah.
And yet it was, for all intents and purposes, just a piece of rope. I don't tell that story much, but it's part of the core of my memory bank. One of those memories that is so indelible, because even as it was happening, I'm saying to myself, people aren't going to believe this. What's going on? How is this happening? Am I going to sound, like a liar or a fool if I tell this story? But it's going on. It's up another foot. It's up another foot.
Yeah.
It's in a category that's not paranormal. And I'm sure there was a way of doing it. There had to be, because it was done. But what do you make of that?
If you read John Keel's Jado,
I have.
That's one of the things he investigates is that rope trip.
I remember. I even talked to him about that. I told him that story. He gave me a very knowing smile. I had the book already. I don't remember right now if he was able to resolve it. Do you?
Yeah, he came across a few different ways that they do it. Not quite like what you're describing, because they would
I will
often
have to reread it because it's right here on the shelf. But
they would often climb the rope too, but they would go up so high people couldn't see them. And there would be an attachment somewhere else that was unobvious. But I don't know how he would have made the rope go just up. I'm sure it's just something we didn't see,
Well, again, while it's going on, I have perfectly good eyesight at that point. And I am seeing open sky. Again, there's no trees, there's no buildings close by. So I love that happened to me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's a gentle tap on the shoulder, reminding you that the world is filled with mysteries, some of them tricks.
Yep.
But other ones, genuine mysteries. But a mystery is a mystery. I don't know about you, but some years ago, somebody asked me if I thought that by the time I died, if I didn't know the answers to the questions I was curious about UFOs on, if I'd be disappointed or feel I had, wasted my life or something. And I gave it thought, because that's a real question. And it was not only would that not be the case, but what an interesting life I'm living.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and how bloody boring life would be without mysteries. Can you imagine?
There in the very last episode of Babylon 5, Sheridan's about to die, and he's talking to this ancient being, and he says to him, "There's so much I still don't understand." And the being goes, "As it should be." And that is one of my favorite lines from that show.
That's a great line and a great sentiment.
Yeah.
And thank you for reminding me about Giotto. I'm going to start rereading the book this week because now
Fun book.
I have to re-explore that. It's just one of those memories that I treasure. I
Yeah.
treasure.
Yeah.
At this point in your life, do you feel that the UFO phenomena, and I'll say the truly anomalous UFO phenomena, which for years, like me, you've been an observer of the scene and the way that it is dealt with by the media, by the public, by the scientific community, that the change that came with the publication of the pair of articles in the December 2017, a Sunday edition of the New York Times, that signaled a real difference in the way that popular culture, the world at large, government, the world of science take the subject. If that may lead us to some real breakthroughs in the years to come, what is your sense about how dramatically things have changed in the last few years and where we're going with this?
I don't really think things have changed that much, honestly. I feel a lot of this is being, it's the same game that gets played over and over with this idea of disclosure that I don't think we're ever going to see because they may not even know what we think they know. Um, but it's sort of that carrot on the stick that they occasionally bring out, and a lot of times it's the same players doing it. And if anything, I think they're trying to lead us away from whatever the actual phenomena may be.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't disagree with you on that. And when I talked about the change, what I'm referring to specifically is that more or less, generally speaking, when government is now discussing the subject of unidentified flying objects or unidentified aerial phenomena, or the world of science, or talk shows, or major media on the left or right, they're not rooted in ridicule
oh, yeah.
anymore. There's still
Yeah.
ridicule, but that has changed dramatically, that it's being more or less respected. And that's a breath of fresh air.
That
But
is. Absolutely.
I think you may be right in that meet the new boss, same as the old boss, and the report that came out of the Pentagon in June. Much ado about nothing, and the words of Mr. William Shakespeare for many of us, and at the same time, an important moment symbolically in at least an acknowledgement. And then, if you read between the lines and have some knowledge of the history of reportage and documents and formally classified papers, what they were doing this summer was saying, this is indeed a mystery. Could it be the Russians with some secret weapon? Which is exactly what they were saying in 1947. Could it be the Chinese? Well, no,
Right.
I wasn't saying that back then. And then again, could it possibly be? Is it possible that it could be extraterrestrial or another phenomenological quirk in the world that we haven't thought, when they know full well, and they've known for 3/4 of a century at least exactly what's going on. But here we are yet once again trotting out the old explanations or guesses, but in a way that seems more respectful in public rather
True.
than in private.
I guess my two takeaways from this are A, the government always lies. They don't need to, but they always will. They will always spin it to their benefit.
Mm.
And B, I mean, staying on that for a moment. So there's no reason we should ever believe what they're saying wholeheartedly. And B, does anyone really believe that the government on some level has not been paying attention to weird things in our skies at any point? I don't think there has ever been a point where they were not looking at this stuff. They were not public about it, but they've always been watching this stuff, because I doubt they exactly know what it is either. Plus, they're always looking for anything that could be a threat.
I think that last one is the one that resonates most with regular folks who are now realizing they have permission to take the subject seriously.
Yeah.
That 10 years ago, if a couple took this seriously, they might have friends that they discussed it with discreetly, but they certainly wouldn't talk about it with colleagues at work or, members of their family. It would be a very in-house subject, where now it's valid enough that it's not a presenting sign of some dysfunction, which has always been a basic question of mine, and I'm sure of yours too, how brilliantly things were spun in the summer of 1947. Because what we're talking about here, and always have been, is, best example I can give is that we're friends, but let's say we're neighbors, and that I run into you on the street tomorrow, and I say, Seriah, funniest thing happened to me yesterday afternoon or last night. I was out walking the dog, or shoveling the snow, or making some steaks on the barbecue, or whatever, and I looked up and I saw this thing or these things, and they were of unconventional shapes compared to anything I've ever seen in the sky, and they were as little as stars, they were as big as aircraft carriers, they were rectangular, triangular, oblong, the shape of a breath mint or of a dinner plate. And they were moving around in ways that things can't move, as far as I understand, in my lay understanding of aerodynamics. And I wonder what the hell I was looking at. Now, in a logical, pragmatic world, you would probably either say or think something to the effect of, gee, that's interesting. I wonder what they were too. Correct?
Right.
But miraculously and brilliantly, in the summer of 1947, it was wired up by daily pounding away by our major media that to say something like that, I saw an unidentified object in the sky, was a presenting sign for, you are mentally ill, you are a mystic, you're some kind of hoaxer, you're trying to figure out a way to be famous, and you figure this is it, or you have some plan how you're taking this seriously will make you money, when what's being ignored is you've simply said you saw something you couldn't identify in the sky and you wonder what it was. I mean, that is one of the most, maybe the most brilliant pieces of disinformation, of dystopian education I am aware of in the history of government, humanity, or human affairs.
Yeah. Yeah. Can't disagree with that. I do think that before the New York Times article, that the culture was changing a little bit due to reality TV.
Yes.
Um,
And through the internet.
you had all the but you had all the ghost hunter shows, and you had the Bigfoot shows and ancient aliens and stuff like this. And I would find more and more people were more comfortable talking about this stuff because that stuff was on television and taken seriously.
Yeah. Very good point.
Though those shows may not be great, they at least did that. They opened people up a little more, and I found a lot of people were into that stuff.
Yeah. It's doubly interesting now that you say that, which is absolutely on the money. The same people will often say, and I got into it in the 1980s, if I'm old enough, with shows like Unsolved Mysteries.
Yep. Oh,
which-
yeah. Sightings.
Exactly.
If they're a little older than In Search Of.
Yes. Exactly. All really important shows in their ways, in giving the media a way to help us all to open our minds to what we were told growing up as kids is not part of the way the world really is.
Yeah.
In your interviews with the wide variety of people that you've worked with, have you ever had anybody on who puts forward a theory regarding the paranormal, the unknown, or UFOs that you have found yourself in complete disagreement with?
Probably. The one that sticks out is what's his name? Lloyd, who did the Star Child skull. What's his last name?
Gosh,
He
he
passed away.
passed a few years ago of
Yeah.
cancer, of course.
Super nice guy. Really
Yes.
loved talking to him.
Yes.
But like, he stopped me dead when he flat out said that what he had was the skull of a gray alien. And I said, well, you don't know that because we don't have a gray alien skull to compare it to. And he said, yes, we do. And for a moment I was like, we do? Wait, what am I missing here? And I'm like, where do we have the skull of a gray alien? And he said, the Star Child skull. I went, okay, this is a circle we're not going to continue. Lloyd Pye, thank you.
You know, it's interesting in that I had the same reaction. I thought he was an extremely nice man who genuinely believed what he was putting forward.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And for me, and it comes up over and over for me, some of it just has to do with the way we deploy language. If he had maintained that he has what he felt or had come to believe, or evidence that had been, presented to him or that he had done, that he believed or felt that he had the skull of a gray alien, I could respect that. But the moment you jump to say, I have the skull of a gray alien, and it's something that is problematic in the paranormal and especially the UFO field, when somebody becomes hyper-specific about an alleged fact that there is no way to empirically prove, we have our backs to the wall, we're in trouble because of it. There is a very famous person in the UFO world who has said on a number of occasions there are X number of alien civilizations coming and visiting the Earth. I remember the number 57 at one point. And I remember thinking to myself, blank you and the horse you rode in on. You make my brain explode in the worst way possible. If you were who you are and you had contacts right up to the top of the NSA and other super secret spook organizations and the world of bona fide psychics and channelers, and somehow were also connected deeply to world leaders, and just to keep it interesting, you were the reincarnated master of 6 different alien civilizations, there is no way you could know for an absolute fact that maybe it wasn't 56 or 37 or 59, or the other pronouncement, just as impossible and problematic for me, all aliens are good.
Right. If we're even dealing with something extraterrestrial.
Exactly.
Because my feelings are we could have extraterrestrials on this planet and not even know it, because they may be so different from our reality that we don't perceive them as being real, or as them being unusual. We could have life on every planet in this solar system. We've seen extreme life on planet Earth. There's no reason to think it doesn't exist elsewhere in the solar system. Whether it's intelligent or not is hard to say. But there's no reason it couldn't achieve a level of intelligence that's ours or higher, and we wouldn't know because we're not looking for it. We're looking for carbon-based human-like life forms out there. Even past civilizations may not have evolved the same way we did.
That's a very good point.
I more and more look at the idea that whatever this is has been with us the whole time and hasn't come to us from outer space. It may have come to us from somewhere else, or it may be something we just can't normally perceive. I don't dislike the work that Laird Scranton has done with the Dogon, showing that their belief is that there are 2 universes that that sort of trade spots over the whole procession, the length of the procession,
Yes.
and that one of them has perfect knowledge but inability to act, and the other has the ability to act but imperfect knowledge. And so that
Exactly.
what we're dealing with is something from that other universe trying to communicate that perfect knowledge to us, but no easy way to do it.
Thank you for bringing up Laird Scranton. He is one of my favorite antiquarian scholars and one of the nicest people in the work as well. And we
Oh,
both
yeah.
had him
Yes.
on the show, on our shows. Interesting that you say what you do the way that you do. When I entered my obsession on this subject, I was thinking very simply and very linearly on a subject I had never given any real thought to, other than my childhood sighting and then repressing that memory in the moment, which is that they're extraterrestrial. The government knows, tell us everything you know, power to the people, you have no right. But over the years and then the decades, I have become very comfortable with the idea, the reality that we are dealing with a myriad of phenomena and life forms and situations. Uh, Jacques Vallée and John Keel have pointed us in a direction to look at such phenomena in more relaxed ways than hard metal advanced technology.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. I think that some of what we're dealing with definitely falls within those parameters. But I find it amusing sometimes that when I see these subjects debated, especially by young Turks with attitudes, it's either this or this, as
Oh, right.
opposed to yes, they're extraterrestrial as well, which is like the most conservative, ironically, theoretical basis for a lot of the idea of truly unidentified flying objects, and that one doesn't necessarily displace the other.
No.
It's just a bunch of stuff going on at the same time. And in the extraterrestrial realm, I would not be surprised if we're not being visited by quite a number of other intelligences or civilizations or groups with varying relationships with, various attitudes about. The primary ranking occupant of this wonderful little piece of space dust, us, and that their relationship with the Earth may predate our taking up residence here, or that the fact that, and now it seems fairly conservative as well, that they have assisted our development, if you want to call it assist. We do the same thing in laboratories with various animals and other living things of, a little genetic splice there and a bit of manipulation here, that we may be, in one case, for example, some groups graduate experiment gone horribly wrong.
They may just be manipulating our belief systems too.
That as well. Not to mention actually moving some of the chess pieces and the marionette strings in what we call history. All of this is wide open right now. Nothing is too crazy.
No.
If one approaches it in the spirit that we are here.
Well, my view and my way of explaining my view of things to people is very simple. I'll say you can call it whatever you want. UFOs, extraterrestrial, but whatever this stuff is, if we take the names away from it, people have been experiencing it across culture throughout history. So something is happening. Doesn't tell us what, but the fact that that people from various cultures have had basically the same experiences, not just with UFOs, but Bigfoot, ghosts, all this stuff, whatever label you want to put on it, those experiences are everywhere. It is a human experience.
Yeah.
So you can't just say, well, this isn't real, because it's clearly real on some level and something that everyone across history has experienced to some degree. Most people have paranormal experiences in their life, even if they don't want to acknowledge them. there's things there that if you really poke at people, they'll be like, well, was this one thing, I mean, it's a part of being human. And the way I've been looking at some of this stuff recently deals with the type of light they emit, actually. A long time ago, John Keel wrote The Eighth Tower. And one of the things he noticed is that these objects often start in, like, I think it's the ultraviolet, go and then move through the infrared or vice versa. And I was listening to the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and they
Hmm.
had this ufologist on who's just a friend of theirs, and he's collected a lot of information. And they're a good set of shows, but on one of them, he started talking about how he was taking pictures of a military craft, and every picture was blurry. And he was like, "Why are these all blurry?" And then he remembered, "Oh, that's right. They're using infrared light on these craft to make them hard to see on radar and stuff like that." But that struck me that he's taking pictures of infrared light and it's screwing with his camera. So I did more research, and I found that, like, in Taiwan and some of the protesters, they would get hats, and on the top of the hats would be infrared lights that put light over their faces so
Wow.
that it blurred the faces on any of the
Yes.
cameras. And looking further, I had someone, one of my Patreons actually came in and talked to me because he worked in the military on this very thing, and he said that you can direct light to destroy cameras. And so now I'm looking at this going, that joke that Bigfoot's just blurry? If this stuff isn't what we think it is, if it's projecting from somewhere else and it's coming into our reality from a different spectrum,
Hmm.
it may be emitting light that our cameras just don't capture, or it screws with the cameras, which is why people try to take pictures and they can't, or they take a picture and there's just nothing there when they were clearly seeing something, or the thing is blurry when it was standing still because there's a form of light being emitted, whether it be infrared or something we don't even know about, is being emitted either intentionally or unintentionally by these things as they enter our reality.
Um, I'm still stuck on the infrared light
Messing
being
with
worn.
cameras.
As we know, China is the most advanced country in terms of facial recognition
Yep.
and other dystopian ways of knowing where everybody is at any point and what they're doing, which I think many of us find very frightening and know that there are elements within our government of going, boy, I wish we had that one. That would be great. Yeah, we've got it in places, but oh, those Chinese, they got it down, which is scary stuff. But what a brilliant, if it can work, way to help make themselves more difficult to identify in terms of demonstrations against this kind of totalitarianism.
And then there are videos. There was one on UFO hunters that really stuck out to me. I didn't really like that show that much, but I still
Mhm.
watched it because
Yeah,
it was a UFO show.
sure, sure.
And the most impressive thing was the episode they had where they were dealing with the police and stuff. They have a police helicopter flying over a city, and the helicopter is on the video, on the night vision, the infrared video camera they have, is picking up an object following the helicopter. It was not visible to them. And they're going, "What the hell?" And they're turning, the thing is turning around and continues following them. And they're like, "What is this?" And there was no good answer for what it is, but again, it's something that was existing only in the infrared spectrum.
Mm.
One of Andrew Collins' books, I forget which one it was. It was like his second or third book, Alien Energies, maybe. He talks about people taking infrared photos and picking up UFOs and other stuff on those infrared photos that were not visible to the naked eye. And one further thing was the which very well, is the whole orgone energy thing,
Yeah,
which also may play a part in this.
yeah. As we come in toward the end of the show now, is there any specific thing that you would want to share with our audience just about attitude or if this is a part of your life, um, how to deal with it, or for folks that are interested in learning more about it, um, to follow the path that you did in becoming educated on these esoteric subjects, or, you know?
Well, my path, I mean, because it started with the Kundalini, with the weirdness, um, it had that element of stuff and meditation practices and stuff like that. But I also got involved in occult practices and started at some point realizing that the things I'm dealing with were very similar to stuff I was hearing from UFO people.
Mm,
And it's like, well, what if this is the same stuff with a different face? So I was never, I didn't approach this stuff with fear. And I feel like when you approach it with fear, whatever this stuff is, whether it be a poltergeist, a UFO experience or something anomalous that you can't even put your finger on, it seems to pull energy from us. So if you're giving
mm,
out negative energy, you seem to have more negative experiences. When you start, like Strieber seemed to go through that. Like at a certain point, he stopped viewing it as a negative experience, and the experience stopped being as negative. And I think
yeah.
again, that's partially because when it manifests to us, it's pulling whatever energy is available to do so. And so I think not approaching this from a point of fear, not being terrified by it, is probably to your advantage. But getting there may take some work.
Great advice and an absolute truth. It's also a matter of human nature that if you are frightened and you do your best to do whatever you can do, remembering wonderful old Broadway show song from South Pacific, I whistle a happy tune. And after a while, I actually think I'm happy. That idea, mind over matter, is a good thing.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that can happen? You'd be eaten by space monsters,
You know what? I'm way more scared of people than I am of the paranormal.
Yes. Right there with you. And right now, a perfect moment in world history. Just all spinning around the Ukraine at the moment.
Yeah.
It's
As a general thing, I think most people in the world want the same things. We have different ideas of how we get that. But as the main people, I'm not talking necessarily about the leaders who are craving for power and butting heads together.
That's right.
But the people all kind of want the same thing, but we've been made to kind of act, kind of amplify our differences rather than the things we agree on. So
Sad.
we
Sad
agree
but
on
true.
98% of the stuff, 2% of the stuff we don't. So the media focuses on that 2%.
Yep. Well, that's also what sells. Fear sells.
It does.
And when things are going smoothly or well, it doesn't bring in the advertising bucks the same way that chaos, trauma, and crisis does, sad to say.
Yes.
Seriah, again, I want to thank you so much for being my guest tonight.
No, absolutely.
And let's do this again and pick
Sure.
up this dialogue. Although next time I get to come back to your show and be your guest.
Absolutely.
Okay. Very quickly, again, the show is Where Did the Road Go? And where can people hear this?
Wheredidtheroadgo.com. Every show from the first one back in January of 2013 is up there.
Outstanding.
Almost 1,000 shows at this point.
Damn. Way to go, bro. And for us metalheads,
thelastexit.org.
And there's also another musical feature that happens on the station every once in a while. Can you tell us about that briefly?
Yeah, they kind of filled that slot in, but for a while there was a Dealer's Choice show. And I would occasionally do that with different people. And I had you and Richard Dolan up to play jazz once. And that's actually on, I think, the Last Exit site in the Dealer's Choice archive.
And that was so much fun for Richard and I. Both of us love jazz, but different kinds of jazz. This, by the way, is just a section of this wall.
Yes.
Of 40,000 albums or however many. And that goes up to the ceiling and then twists around to the other wall. It's breathtaking. And in this age of analog reality, digital reality, it's wonderful to see records. This is Meanwhile Here on Earth on KGRA Digital Broadcasting with Peter Robbins, that's me, your host, and my guest tonight, Seriah Azkath. Again, website, Where Did the Road Go? Next week's guest, don't miss it, is going to be Kathleen Martin. She's going to be discussing her new book, Forbidden Knowledge, A Personal Journey from Alien Abduction to Spiritual Transformation, and be joined in the second half of the show by some distinguished panelists. If you've enjoyed our show, please tell your friends. Stay safe, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind.